As I'm recording this video, I'm about 3 weeks away from marking the end of my 34th year in Korea and the beginning of my 35th. June 5th, 2025, that's the day. Every year around this time, I tend to get a little reflective and think back on my life here, how things have gone, how I've changed. And since I've started this channel, that's kind of been an ongoing process. It's not something I expected, but through making the videos that I publish here and coming up with the ideas for them and that kind of thing, I often find myself traveling, back into my early days here in the country and thinking back, and especially so since I enabled the channel memberships, because the videos I make for the channel members are more personal. I talk about the channel and my video making process, of course, but I also talk about memories. And the most recent one I published before this video was about an old friend, somebody I haven't seen in years who is no longer with us. There was a time when the amount of time that I have spent in Korea was a big deal to me. I remember chatting with this guy on my first visit to Itaewon, January 1992. I had been in Korea for about 7 months, a little over 7 months at that point. And I was chatting to this guy, former soldier. He had been in Korea for 6 years. And to me, that was like, wow, 6 years, unbelievable. By the way, I'm on the eastern end of Cheonggye Stream. When I've shown Cheonggye Stream in my videos in the past, it's always been over on the western end toward the downtown area. This end is a lot greener. And here, this is the Songbuk-cheon, the Songbuk Stream, coming out of Songbuk-gu, Songbuk District. It feeds into the Cheonggye Stream here, which then goes on and feeds into another stream, which then feeds into the Han River. And here, these old columns here, these were the supports for the Cheonggye Expressway, which used to run overhead here when Cheonggye Stream was covered up. So a few months after I met that guy who had been here 6 years, I was back up at Camp Casey. I was a medic up there in a tank battalion. And I got tasked out one weekend to cover this parachute club they had there. I don't know how often they went up, but they would go up periodically on a weekend, on a Saturday or a Sunday, or maybe both, I don't know, and jump out of a helicopter. So a random medic would be tasked to cover the event in case something went wrong. And while I was there was a guy standing next to me. He had this big shock of white hair, looked kind of like Mark Twain, had the mustache too. And he was in his 60s at the time. This was 1992. And he told me he had been coming to Korea off and on and staying here since 1948. But at that point, he had been here for 15 years continuously. And he talked about how the first time he had come through this area that we were at, we were standing next to a stream that ran through the middle of the army base. And we were, looking up at the helicopter, and the parachutists would land in a field around the stream. And this guy was telling me how his first time in the area as a soldier, they had camped in this stream in 1948. And Dongducheon was just a little collection of huts, basically, at the time. While I was there, it was quite a bit more than that. It was a small town by Korea standards, a country town, but it certainly was no village. And over the years, I've met people who came here in the 70s or the 80s, and I love hearing their stories. But at some point, the amount of time I have been in Korea became less important to me, as just the fact of how much time had passed. And this really hit home for me a couple of times in the past 3 years or so, when I've bumped into people who I knew in the 90s, but I hadn't seen in several years. One of them was this guy from the UK. I first talked to him on one of my early visits. Look at this. I love walking through here. It's a lovely, lovely place to walk. But yeah, this guy from the UK, I first bumped into him in Itaewon on one of my early visits there in, must have been 92. And he would have been in his early to mid 40s at the time. And that was 34 years ago. And I ran into him about 3 years back. And I, of course, recognized him. Not at first. At first glance, I didn't know him. He was just this elderly gentleman walking down the street. But then I got another look at him, and he looked at me. And then as soon as that happened, I knew him. And we were never what I would call friends. We were just, acquaintances. We'd sometimes end up in the same groups of people and the bars in Itaewon. Now and again, we'd wind up at the same table or something, but I never really knew him. But think about that. The guy was 40-something years old back then, and now he's in his 70s. And another example, this Korean guy that I knew back then, he was in his late 40s, early 50s when I first met him. Now he's in his early 80s. And when you don't see somebody for 10, 12, 15 years, the last time you saw them, they look the same as they always have. And then you run into them again, and they're not the same anymore. They've aged dramatically. It's the same feeling I get every time I go back home and I see people who I haven't seen in a long time. Children are married with children, people who I grew up with are grandparents. And, it's the passage of time that we all have to deal with. So I think that has colored my perspective more in the past couple of years when I think about my time here. It doesn't matter anymore how long I've been in Korea. It just matters how much time has passed. But this is something we all have to deal with. This isn't unique to me, and this isn't a channel about how we deal with aging or the passage of time. This is a channel about Korea. And thinking about friends and acquaintances, that was a topic somebody emailed me with a question about a while back, and I filmed an answer for my most recent Q&A, the video I published before this one, but I ended up cutting it out because it was just so long and rambling, and the video was long enough as it was. I cut out another question too for the same reason. But this person asked me about how to make friends in Korea. They were coming at it from the perspective that it seemed difficult. They were reluctant to get to know foreign residents too closely because foreign residents tend to leave. That's something I mentioned in one of my older videos from last year. It's a real thing. It happens. And they had the impression that Koreans were difficult to get to know, that they were kind of cold. And that's a broad generalization that I don't think is true. Now, one of the consequences of having spent over half of my life in Korea is that I have no idea what it's like to live as an adult anywhere else in the world. The only life I know is the life of a foreign resident in the Republic of Korea. That's my life. And I say that as a kind of a caveat to what I'm going to say next. And that is, I don't think that making friends with foreign residents in Korea or anywhere is any different fundamentally from making friends anywhere else in the world. No matter where you are in the world, people are going to leave. It happens. People move away. They get new jobs. They get married. They get promotions. They go off to study and never come back. I think if you're living in a big city anywhere in the world, that's going to happen more often than it does if you're out in a rural community somewhere. But even there, it's going to happen. So fundamentally, yeah, I don't think there's a difference. If you're here in Seoul, it's just a matter of scale. You're going to meet a lot of foreign residents here, probably, just because you're going to gravitate to them naturally. Unless you speak Korean fluently, it's the natural thing to do. The more people you meet, the more people you'll end up saying goodbye to. So that can be difficult just in terms of scale, but I really don't think it's any different than making friends anywhere else in the world. But the great thing is, it's so much easier to keep in touch with people than it was when I first got here. We've got social media networks. We've got email. Everybody has email now. Everybody has mobile phones with chat apps. Everybody, is a text away. It's up to you to maintain it, whether they're here with you in the country or not. I guess it depends on how you define friend. When somebody really close to you, who you're seeing very regularly, leaves, yeah, that can be painful. I get that. It's happened to me a couple of times. Very close friends who I spent a lot of time with over multiple years eventually left Korea, and we eventually lost touch. One of them no longer with us. So yeah, I get that. But I don't see that as a barrier to making close friends. I see that as just part of life. And that same thing could happen anywhere in the world, even in my home country. If I go back to America and I make a close friend, that close friend could move away in 5 years, 6 years, 10 years. It's the same thing. I don't see that as a barrier to making friends. That's kind of, to me, like not dating because a potential girlfriend or boyfriend could one day break up with you. We'd all be very lonely people if all of us were reluctant to make friends and lovers because they might one day go away. So I've always been happy to meet more people here, more foreign residents. I love hearing the experiences from people around the world. I love hearing how they're reacting to life here in Korea, the things they find challenging, the things they embrace and enjoy, compared to my experience, which I love sharing with them how it was when I first got here. There are just so many benefits to going out and meeting other foreign residents here that go both ways. It's good for you, it's good for them. And maybe one day you're going to leave and they're going to miss you. Think about it from the other side. It happens both ways. Now, as for Koreans feeling like they're cold and distant and somehow difficult to get to know, I don't remember ever thinking that myself. So I have a hard time relating to that perspective. But I think in many cases, probably not all, the issue is just that the Korean people you meet don't feel confident enough in their English ability or other foreign language, if they're speaking to you in another language, to show their true personality. Their true personality doesn't come through because of their lack of confidence in their ability to speak a foreign language. I can relate to that 100%. I talked about that in one of my previous videos, how I used to be too afraid to raise my hand in a restaurant and say "Cheonggye," to get somebody's attention, because I just didn't have the confidence in my pronunciation or anything, and I felt awkward and strange saying it. If I had been forced to communicate in Korean every day, all the time, nobody would have gotten to know me. People would have thought I was cold and distant, or probably stupid and strange because of how bad my Korean was back then. It was only after I became more fluent in the language that I was able to really let my personality come through when I speak Korean. And these days, my mother-in-law lives with us, and I joke with her all the time. I never used to do that. In the first several years of my marriage, I barely ever spoke to my in-laws unless they spoke to me first. And even then, my answers were stilted and brief. And my wife would always expand on anything I was saying. But these days, I joke with her, right? My mother-in-law. And, I make her laugh. That's what I do. When I'm speaking English, I joke with my friends and my relatives. And it was only in recent years that I've been able to do that in Korean confidently. So that's what I suspect is the root cause of this belief that Koreans seem cold and distant. I think it's just the fact that people don't speak enough Korean to communicate. I think that's about the extent of what I can say on that, because I just feel like that's not my experience at all, that they're cold and distant. They've always seemed warm and friendly and kind to me as a whole, on the whole. I think it's just a matter of framing, how you frame your interactions with them, how you react to them. And if you allow for the language barrier and the cultural barrier, then you'll be more likely to get over little things that seem odd or awkward or cold or whatever. That kind of ties into another question that I cut from the recent Q&A. It was about feeling like an outsider. The question came from a Korean American who had issues when he was growing up in America as a Korean, feeling like an outsider. And he asked me if I ever felt that way in Korea, even after having been here so long. The short answer is I came to Korea knowing I was an outsider. See, the difference between his situation and my situation is, I don't know if he was born in America to immigrant parents or if he immigrated as a child. That wasn't clear to me, but either way, from his perspective, he just wants to be American, right? He just wants to be like everybody else. When you're an immigrant or a first generation American or whatever nationality in the place where your family has immigrated, you want to just be accepted. You want to belong. You definitely don't want to feel like an outsider. Your whole goal is to have the same identity, the same national identity as the people around you, the other people living in the country where you reside. That isn't always possible. It really, really depends on the community that you live in, but also where your family is from. People from certain parts of the world immigrating to America are going to have better luck in certain parts of America than they would in other parts of America. That's the way it is, unfortunately. Often when I'm out on a walk, I listen to some different podcasts, and one of them, they interview people from across different industries, mostly public figures, but not always. People from politics, the media, law, medicine, business, just all kinds of people, chefs, celebrities. For one of them, a doctor whose family comes from India, when he was young, he felt like the way to belong was to join as many group activities at school as he could, sports, clubs, whatever. And in the end, that wasn't it, but it was his attempt at belonging. That's a completely different perspective from mine. I came here never intending to stay. I came here for 1 year in the Army. That was it. That was the plan. 1 year, do my time here and go. I wanted to go to Germany. I didn't want to come to Korea. I was coming at it with an open mind and a positive perspective because I wanted to enjoy the time I had while I was here. I didn't want to be miserable. So I was just going to do my time and move on. But something happened. I had fun. I enjoyed it. So I stayed another year, and on and on. And I've talked about this before. I won't rehash it here. But the main thing is I knew I was an outsider. I didn't come here trying to belong, wanting to belong. I knew I didn't belong, which if you saw my previous reflection video, the first one I did last year, I opened it by saying I eventually realized I did belong here. And that is true. I do feel like I belong here. I don't belong anywhere else. But as for being an outsider, I knew from the beginning I wasn't Korean. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know the culture. I was an outsider through and through. And that framed every interaction I had here. I didn't expect the Korean people to treat me like a Korean. Most people did not have enough experience interacting with foreigners to fully understand or appreciate the cultural differences, and they were always asking about them, always talking about them. I can't remember the last time somebody stared at me in Seoul as if I were some kind of curiosity. Some people do stare at me sometimes because that's just what some people do. But seriously, there were times in the past where I could go to some neighborhoods in Seoul and people would stop what they were doing just to gawk at me, right? That happened every time I left the city. Anywhere I went in the countryside, anywhere, people would stop what they were doing and gawk at me. And I've heard it still happens in some places. It hasn't happened to me in a long, long time, or I just haven't noticed it. But I really don't think it happens in Seoul anymore, but that's how little people knew about foreigners back then. Today, I still accept that some people see me as an outsider. They don't know that I've lived here for 34 years. For all they know, I just stepped off the plane yesterday. When I go to order a coffee or food or something somewhere and people speak English to me, there's a little bit of annoyance inside because it's like, hey, I speak Korean now. I didn't just step off the plane. Why are you speaking English to me? But that quickly goes away. That's just that, fast brain reaction. If you ever read the book Thinking Fast and Slow, you'll know what I mean when I say that. And if you haven't read it, it's a book by Daniel Kahneman. You really should. It's an eye-opening book. But, once that initial reaction goes away, I allow for the fact that, this person has no idea that I can speak Korean. They have no reason to assume that I would. But then again, these days, more people do speak Korean to me in those situations than they did in the past. And I have seen when they speak Korean to people who don't speak Korean, they'll switch to English, And if somebody speaks to me in English, sometimes I'll answer in English, sometimes I'll answer in Korean. And when I answer in Korean, they just switch to Korean too. Doesn't matter. From my perspective, Korea has come so far in that regard in the last 30 years that it's, you would have fewer opportunities than in the past to feel like an outsider if you didn't already expect to be treated like one, right? That said, I'm sure that if you're coming here without expecting to be an outsider, you're going to feel left out in many cases. You're going to feel totally like an outsider. I can't count the number of times that I have been sitting with my wife or Korean friends, and they're meeting their Korean friends, and they're all jabbering away 100 miles an hour, and I have no idea what they're saying, and I just, look at my phone. And these days, I understand more. But yeah, when people speak quickly, I get lost very easily. But back in the day, I didn't know anything they were talking about, really. And I think about the first time I took my wife to the States. We went to my sister's house, and we had a bit of a family gathering there. Both of my parents were there. My stepmother was there. My sister, her husband, their son and daughter. And we were all sitting in the living room, talking, laughing, having a good old time. And then at one point, my mother says, "Where's your wife?" She was gone. She had been sitting there in the living room with us, but now she was gone, and nobody had realized she had left. Then I found her in one of the bedrooms, balled up on the bed and crying. And I asked her what was wrong. And she said she didn't understand anything we were talking about. And she just had this sudden wave of feeling lonely and left out and all of this. The great thing is, shortly after that, she got into a truck with my mother and my sister, just the three of them, and went downtown together. And I encouraged her to do it, and she did it, and everything went fine. No problem. If my expectations had been different when I first arrived here, it probably wouldn't have gone this way. I mean, there were some challenging days in the early years I was here that, had I come at them with a different perspective, would have led to a very different outcome. Thank you for joining me today on this walk along Seoul's waterways. We started at the Cheonggye and we're wrapping up here at the Han River. As always, thank you for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you.